In the summer of 1867, a quiet farming region outside Sedalia, Missouri became the center of one of the most unsettling medical mysteries ever whispered about in the American Midwest. At the heart of it was an 8-year-old boy named Timothy Caldwell. Dr. Samuel Harding, the only formally trained physician within 50 miles, would later devote 3 leather-bound journals to documenting Timothy's behavior. What he observed defied every medical belief of the 19th century. On the surface, Timothy appeared polite, calm, even charming. But beneath that carefully maintained innocence was something far darker, something Dr. Harding could neither diagnose nor explain. Over the course of 6 months, a chilling pattern emerged. 3 people died in what authorities labeled tragic accidents. Dozens of farm animals were found dead under unexplained circumstances, and in every single case, Timothy Caldwell was nearby watching, discovering, or quietly involved. Local officials sealed the records. The journals vanished into storage, and for more than a century, the truth remained buried. But what happened in Sedalia County forces us to confront a disturbing question. Can true evil exist in a child? Before we continue, if stories like this pull you in, make sure to subscribe to Rite Stories and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest forgotten mysteries, and let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. We love hearing from our global community. The story of Timothy Caldwell did begin with violence. It began with loss. Missouri in 1867 was still scarred by the Civil War. Farms were broken, families were shattered. The Caldwell homestead, located 15 miles south of Sedalia, had once thrived. But Timothy's grandfather died at Wilson's Creek, and his grandmother succumbed to consumption during the brutal winter of 1865. Timothy's uncle, Thomas Caldwell, inherited land he couldn't manage and debts he couldn't escape. When word arrived that Timothy's father had died in Andersonville prison, Thomas saw both responsibility and relief. The boy could work. Timothy arrived in the spring of 1866 carrying a small cloth bag and a gaze that felt far too old for an 8-year-old. He spoke little of his past, only fragments. A coughing mother, a soldier father. Nights spent with neighbors after death came calling. What stood out most wasn't what Timothy said, but how he behaved. He never complained, never played, never cried. He worked from dawn until dusk with mechanical focus. Neighbors noticed. Animals reacted. Chickens refused to approach the fence when Timothy was nearby. Horses grew restless. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson famously remarked, "It's like the animals know something we don't." The first death came in August. 5-year-old Mary Fletcher was found drowned in Willow Creek water barely deep enough to cover her knees. Timothy was the one who raised the alarm. His description of the body was disturbingly precise, too precise for a frightened child. Dr. Harding ruled it an accident, but something didn't sit right. At Mary's funeral, while the town wept, Timothy watched his eyes dry, his expression unchanged. 3 weeks later, another death. Henrik Larson, an experienced climber, was found dead at the base of Devil's Bluff. His neck snapped from the fall. Timothy, once again, was the one who found the body. Scattered around Larson's corpse were dozens of dead bees far from any hive. Harding wrote one final line that night. "This child does not react as others do," he observes. And the worst was still to come. When questioned about Henrik Larson's death, Timothy calmly offered a theory. He suggested that the old man may have been attacked by bees and lost his balance. He was always saying how angry they get when you bother them. Timothy explained maybe they swarmed him and he got confused. On the surface, the explanation seemed reasonable. Dr. Samuel Harding even noted that it fit the facts at least loosely. But something about the scene continued to trouble him long after the body had been removed. The dead bees were not scattered along the cliff face or the path Henrik would have taken while fleeing. Instead, they were concentrated in a tight cluster directly around the body, as if they had appeared only after the fall. If Henrik had disturbed a hive at the top of Devil's Bluff, Harding reasoned, there should have been signs of panic agitate, insects, bees crushed along the rocks, or stings marking a trail of flight. None of that existed. When Harding climbed to the top of the bluff himself, his unease deepened. The beehives were completely intact. No broken combs, no signs of recent disturbance. The bees were active but calm, moving from flower to flower in the late summer fields as if nothing unusual had occurred. The third death erased any remaining hope that the previous tragedies were coincident. In September of 1866, 6-year-old Jacob Mill disappeared while playing in the woods near his family's cabin. When night fell and the boy hadn't returned, the entire community mobilized to search. Timothy Caldwell volunteered immediately. For 3 straight days, he searched alongside grown men, showing stamina and focus far beyond what anyone expected from a child his age. He navigated dense woods with confidence, guiding search parties through terrain that even long-time residents struggled to traverse. When asked how he knew the forest so well, Timothy answered simply. He said he spent his free time exploring, looking for plants and herbs his aunt might use for cooking or medicine. On the 4th morning, just after sunrise, Timothy arrived at the Mills cabin. I found something, he told Jacob's father, his voice low and tired. There's an old well, about half a mile north. I heard what sounded like crying. The well was nearly invisible, hidden beneath fallen logs and thick brush. At the bottom lay Jacob Mill, alive, but barely. He had survived nearly 4 days without water, suffering from exposure and exhaustion. Dr. Harding was summoned at once, but the damage was already too severe. Jacob died within hours, his small body unable to recover. The child had been at the bottom of that well for almost 4 days, Harding later wrote. The fact that Timothy Caldwell was able to locate him raises deeply troubling questions. More disturbing than the discovery itself was Timothy's behavior during Jacob's final hour. As the Mills family kept vigil, Timothy sat silently in the corner of the cabin, head bowed as if in prayer. But Dr. Harding, watching from across the room, noticed something unsettling. Timothy was not praying, his lips moved, but his eyes never left Jacob. They tracked every detail, the shallow breathing, the fading color, the flicker of consciousness slipping away. It wasn't grief, Harding saw, it was observation. When Jacob finally died, Timothy showed no shock, no sorrow. Instead, Harding saw something that made his blood run cold: satisfaction. After the funeral, Harding returned alone to the abandoned well. The sight disturbed him in ways he couldn't immediately explain. The well was deeply concealed, its opening masked by debris that should have fallen randomly. But it hadn't. The logs and branches around the rim were deliberately arranged, forming a camouflage so natural it would be nearly impossible to notice unless someone already knew where to look. The implication was terrifying. Jacob Mills had not fallen into the well by accident. Someone had placed him there, and someone had hidden him carefully, waiting until rescue would come too late. That night, Dr. Harding began keeping systematic records on Timothy Caldwell. If his instincts were correct, the boy posed a threat to the entire community. But instinct wasn't proof, and proof was exactly what Harding lacked. Outwardly, Timothy was everything a child should be. He attended church faithfully, reciting prayers with solemn respect. He worked tirelessly on the Caldwell farm, performing tasks that tested even adult men. He spoke politely, obeyed authority, and never acted out. Most importantly, he had reasonable explanations for every tragedy: looking for a calf, walking home from town, helping with a search. Yet Harding's wartime experience had taught him something crucial. There was a certain kind of man, one who killed not out of necessity or duty, but from something colder. Such men showed little reaction to horror, and too much curiosity about suffering. Timothy displayed the same traits, only compressed into the body of nature. By October 1866, Harding began investigating in earnest. Under the guise of routine medical visits, he gathered information across Sedalia County. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. Livestock on nearby farms were dying not from illness but from impossible accidents. Chickens found with their necks snapped cleanly, pigs suffering precise wounds that later became fatal infections, horses developing sudden injuries that forced farmers to put them down. Every affected farm lay within walking distance of the Caldwell property. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson confided that she had lost 17 chickens in 2 months. "The way they're killed," she whispered, "it's too clean." Harding's examinations confirmed her fears. These were not predator attacks. They required anatomical precision. And neighbors had seen Timothy nearby, always polite, always waving. During medical visits to the Caldwell farm, Harding noticed Timothy's growing fascination with injury and death. "How do you know when someone's really dead?" The boy asked casually. "Sometimes they just look asleep." He asked about trauma, about blood loss, about survival. "Did they scream when you cut their arms off?" Timothy once asked about wounded soldiers, or were they too hurt to make noise? The question, spoken gently, respectfully haunted Harding for the rest of his life. By November, 2 journals were filled. What they described was not a troubled child, but a predator, hidden behind perfect manners. And yet, there was still no proof. If you're captivated by stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Rite Story and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next descent into America's darkest forgotten cases. And tell us in the comments, which country are you watching from? Our community spans the world and we want to hear from you. The opportunity to gather that evidence came when Thomas Caldwell injured his back during the fall harvest. The injury required bed rest and daily medical visits, giving Dr. Harding unprecedented access to the Caldwell household. During these visits, he began engaging Timothy in longer conversations, carefully probing to understand the extent of the boy's knowledge and the nature of his thoughts. What he discovered exceeded his worst fears. Timothy Caldwell had been conducting experiments on living creatures for months, possibly years. Using a combination of careful questioning and direct observation, Dr. Harding determined that the boy had been systematically capturing and torturing small animals, studying their responses to various forms of injury and distress. Timothy had mentioned the cave during one of their conversations, describing it as a place where he went to think and be alone. When Dr. Harding investigated the site, he found a carefully organized collection of animal bones, crude surgical instruments fashioned from farm tools, and a series of detailed drawings that documented various experiments in torture and mutilation. The drawings were the most disturbing discovery. Rendered with surprising artistic skill for a child, they showed rabbits, squirrels, birds, and larger animals in various stages of dissection and injury. Each drawing was accompanied by notes written in Timothy's careful handwriting describing the animal's reaction, the time it took to die, and observations about which methods caused the most suffering. The subject remained conscious for approximately 10 minutes after removal of eyes. Read one notation beside a detailed drawing of a rabbit. Vocalizations decreased gradually. Movement ceased after application of pressure to throat. Dr. Harding realized that Timothy had been using the community's animals as subjects for increasingly sophisticated experiments in cruelty. The accidental deaths on neighboring farms were actually the result of Timothy's desire to test his methods on larger subjects. But the most chilling discovery was a newer set of drawings that showed human figures instead of animals. These sketches depicted children and adults in various poses of distress and injury, each accompanied by speculative notes about human anatomy and potential methods of causing harm. One drawing showed a figure that was unmistakably Mary Fletcher, the first child to die. Another depicted Henrik Lenn. A third showed Jacob Mills at the bottom of a well with detailed annotation about the effects of dehydration and exposure on the human body. Timothy Caldwell had not simply been present when these people died. He had planned their deaths, executed those plans with methodical precision, and documented the results for future study. As Dr. Harding would soon discover, the horror in Sedalia County was far from over. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. Dr. Harding faced an impossible situation. The evidence in the cave proved that Timothy Caldwell was responsible for multiple deaths, but that evidence had been obtained through what amounted to illegal search. Moreover, the idea that an 8-year-old child could be a calculating murderer was so far outside the accepted understanding of human nature that no court would accept such a claim. The medical science of 1867 had no framework for understanding antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. The prevailing belief was that children were inherently innocent, corrupted only by bad influences or traumatic experiences. The idea that a child could be born without the capacity for empathy or moral reasoning was literally inconceivable to most people. Dr. Harding knew that if he presented his findings to local authorities, he would likely be dismissed as a man whose mind had been damaged by too many years of treating war casualties. The evidence would be explained away. Timothy would be defended as a traumatized orphan acting out his grief, and the killings would continue. Instead, Dr. Harding decided to confront Timothy directly. During his next visit to the Caldwell farm, he asked the boy to walk with him to check on the livestock in Heifer pasture. Once they were alone, Dr. Harding revealed what he had discovered in the cave. Timothy's reaction was not what Dr. Harding had expected. The boy showed no surprise, no denial, no fear at being caught. Instead, he listened calmly as Dr. Harding described the drawings and notes, occasionally nodding as if confirming the accuracy of the doctor's observations. "You're not going to tell anyone," Timothy said. When Dr. Harding finished speaking, it was not a question or plea, but a statement of fact delivered with absolute confidence. "Why wouldn't I?" Dr. Harding asked, genuinely curious about the boy's reasoning. Timothy smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion that Dr. Harding had ever seen on his face. "Because no one would believe you," he said, "and because you're curious about what I'll do next." The boy was right on both counts. Dr. Harding knew that his claims would sound like the ravings of a man losing his sanity. But Timothy had also identified something that the doctor was reluctant to admit, even to himself: a scientific fascination with observing the development of what might be the most dangerous human being he had ever encountered. "How long have you been doing this?" Dr. Harding asked. "Since I was 5, Timothy replied matter-of-factly. "Maybe earlier. I started with insects, then mice, then bigger things. It's interesting to see how different animals react to the same treatments and the people who died." Timothy shrugged. "They were experiments too. I wanted to see if people would react the same way as animals. They do mostly, but they're better at understanding what's happening to them. That makes it more interesting." Dr. Harding felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "What are you planning to do next?" Timothy considered the question seriously before answering. "I need to find out what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely. Someone who wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late." The implication was clear. Timothy was planning to kill his aunt and uncle. Dr. Harding knew he had perhaps days, possibly only hours, before Timothy acted on his plans. The boy had revealed his intentions with the casual confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, and past experience suggested that Timothy did not delay once he had decided on a course of action. That evening, Dr. Harding visited Sheriff William Crawford in Sedalia. Crawford was a practical man who had served with distinction in the Union Army and had little patience for theories or speculation. But he also trusted Dr. Harding's judgment and was willing to listen to evidence, regardless of how unusual the circumstances might be. Dr. Harding presented his case carefully, focusing on verifiable facts rather than psychological theories. He showed Crawford the drawings and notes from the cave, pointed out the pattern of deaths and accidents surrounding Timothy, and documented the boy's unusual knowledge of anatomy and violence. Most importantly, Dr. Harding revealed Timothy's stated intention to kill his aunt and uncle. This was information that could not be ignored, regardless of the source. "Even if half of what you're telling me is true," Sheriff Crawford said after reviewing the evidence, examining each disturbing drawing with growing alarm, "we can't arrest a child for drawings and suspicions, but we can watch him, and we can be ready to act if he tries anything." Crawford studied the anatomical precision of Timothy's sketches, noting detail that even his experience as a Civil War veteran hadn't prepared him for. The two men spent hours developing their strategy, bringing in Crawford's most trusted deputies, men who had served under him during the war and could be counted on to remain steady under pressure. Dr. Harding and Sheriff Crawford developed a comprehensive plan. Dr. Harding would arrive at the Caldwell farm at his usual time, bringing LDM ostensibly for Thomas's pain management, but actually to keep both Thomas and Sarah sedated enough to prevent Timothy from harming them easily. Sheriff Crawford and his deputies would position themselves strategically around the farm property, close enough to respond quickly but far enough away to avoid detection. The plan was put into effect the following morning. As Dr. Harding approached the farmhouse in his buggy, he noticed immediately that something was different. The usual morning sounds of farm activity, chickens pecking in the yard, pigs grunting in their pen, were absent. The property held an unsettling quiet that made his skin crawl. Timothy appeared in the doorway before Dr. Harding had even climbed down from his buggy. The boy stood perfectly still, his pale blue eyes tracking the doctor's movements with predatory focus. He was dressed in his usual work clothes, but Dr. Harding noticed that Timothy's sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. and his hands appeared to have been scrubbed recently, the kind of thorough cleaning that suggested preparation for messy work. "Good morning, Dr. Harding," Timothy said, his voice carrying its characteristic politeness. But something underneath had changed. There was an anticipation there, an excitement, that the boy was struggling to contain. "I've been waiting for you." The word sent a chill through Dr. Harding. Timothy's use of waiting suggested that he had been expecting this visit, had perhaps even been counting on it as part of whatever plan he had set in motion. Inside the house, Dr. Harding found Thomas and Sarah Caldwell in their bedroom, both apparently sleeping peacefully. But as he approached Thomas's bed to check his condition, he noticed that the man's breathing was unusual, shallow, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that suggested more than natural sleep. "What did you give them?" Dr. Harding asked quietly, not turning to look at Timothy, but knowing the boy was watching every move he made. "Just some herbs I found in the woods," Timothy reply. Ed, his tone innocent, but his choice of words deliberate. "There are so many interesting plants growing wild around here. Some of them have very useful properties." Dr. Harding checked Thomas's pulse and found it weak but steady. Sarah showed similar symptoms. She was deeply unconscious, but still alive. Whatever Timothy had used, he had been careful about the dosage. The boy wanted his victims helpless but alive, at least for now. "They're not going to wake up for several hours," Timothy continued conversationally. "That should give us plenty of time to talk without interruption." The conversation that followed was unlike anything Dr. Harding had ever experienced. Timothy spoke about murder and torture with the clinical detachment of a medical professor discussing anatomy. He described his experiments on animals and humans with scientific precision, explaining his methodologies and the insights he had gained from each death. "Mary Fletcher taught me that drowning is actually quite slow," Timothy said, settling into a chair as if beginning a pleasant afternoon chat. "Everyone thinks people just slip under the water and disappear, but that's not how it works at all. There's struggling and panic and this interesting pattern of breathing attempts before the person finally gives up. I had to hold her down for almost 3 minutes before she stopped fighting." Dr. Harding felt his blood turn to ice. "You held her under the water." Timothy nodded eagerly. "She was playing by the creek, and I told H. I'd found a pretty stone on the bottom. When she bent over to look, I just pushed her head down and held it there. She was so small that it didn't take much strength, but she fought harder than I expected. That's when I realized that people have much stronger survival instincts than animals." "And Henrik Larsson, that was more complicated," Timothy admitted. "I couldn't overpower him physically, so I had to be more creative. I knew he checked his beehives every Thursday morning, so I went up to the bluff the night before and loosened some of the stones along the edge. Then I collected bees from one of his hives and put them in a cloth bag." Timothy's eyes gleamed as he described his methodology. "When Mr. Len climbed up to check the hives, I was waiting behind some rocks. I threw the bag of bees at his face and started shouting that there was a massive swarm attacking him. He panicked and stumbled backward right over the edge where I'd weakened the stone barrier. The fall killed him instantly, just like I calculated it would." "And Jacob Mills." "Jacob was the most interesting of all," Timothy said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher sharing a particularly fascinating lesson. "I didn't kill him quickly like the others. I wanted to see what would happen if someone died slowly over several days. So I convinced him to follow me into the woods by telling him I'd found a family of baby raccoons." Timothy paused, seeming to savor the memory. Jacob was so concerned about the imaginary baby animals that he didn't think twice about the danger. "I helped him climb down into the well. Then I moved the logs and brush to cover the opening. I visited him every day for 4 days, bringing him just enough water to keep him alive, but not enough to let him recover his strength." Dr. Harding realized that Timothy was no longer speaking hypothetically about future experiments. The boy had specific plans, and those plans clearly included the people currently in the house. "What are you planning to do with your aunt and uncle?" Dr. Harding asked directly. Timothy's genuine smile returned broader than Dr. Harding had ever seen it. "That's where you come in, Dr. Harding. See, all of my previous experiments have been with people who didn't know what was happening to them until it was too late. But you're different. You understand exactly what I am and what I'm capable of. That makes you the perfect subject for a completely new type of study." As Timothy spoke, he began moving around the room, gathering items that Dr. Harding recognized as potential weapons. Rope from the barn, a heavy candlestick from the mantelpiece, several sharp kitchen implements. The boy organized his tools with methodical precision, as if preparing for surgery. "I want to find out what happens when someone who knows they're going to die tries to save people they care about," Timothy continued, his excitement growing. "Will you sacrifice yourself to save Uncle Thomas and Aunt Sarah? Will you try to fight me, Even though you know I've planned for that possibility? Will you try to run away and abandon them to save yourself?" Dr. Harding knew that the time for conversation had passed. Timothy had revealed enough of his plans to make clear that everyone in the house was in immediate mortal danger. He drew the pistol from his medical bag and pointed it at the boy. "Step away from the knives, Timothy," Dr. Harding said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Timothy looked at the pistol with interest rather than fear. "That's a Navy Colt, isn't it?" he asked conversationally. "I've seen pictures of them in books about the war. How many bullets does it hold?" "6. Dr. Harding replied automatically, then immediately regretted providing the information. "And how many people are you trying to protect?" Timothy asked. "There's Uncle Thomas, Aunt Sarah, yourself, and presumably the 3 law enforcement officers outside. That's 6 people, if my counting is correct. So even if you shoot me, you'll have used up all your ammunition." Timothy moved closer, no longer bothering to stay out of pistol range. "You want to know how I became what I am," he said, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "You want to understand whether I was born this way or whether something made me this way. You want to know if there are others like me and how to recognize them before they start killing." Each statement was true, and Timothy's ability to identify and exploit Dr. Harding's intellectual curiosity was as frightening as his capacity for violence. The boy understood people well enough to predict their behavior and manipulate their responses, even when they knew they were being manipulated. The confrontation came as Timothy approached his sleeping uncle with a length of rope in his hands. Dr. Harding stepped forward to intervene, but Timothy moved with surprising speed and strength, producing the kitchen knife and slashing at the doctor's arm. The struggle that followed was brief but violent. Timothy fought with the desperate ferocity of a cornered animal, using the knife with skill that spoke of considerable practice. The boy was smaller and weaker than Dr. Harding, but he was also faster and more agile, and he fought with the calculated precision of someone who had studied anatomy extensively. Dr. Harding managed to grab Timothy's wrist and twist until the boy dropped the knife. But Timothy immediately produced another blade from his clothing. It became clear that the boy had prepared multiple weapons and positioned them strategically throughout the house. The sound of their fight brought Sheriff Crawford and his deputies running from their concealed position. They burst through the back door to find Dr. Harding struggling with Timothy while Thomas and Sarah Caldwell lay unconscious on their bed, apparently unaware of the violence occurring around them. Deputy Mitchell quickly subdued Timothy, while Dr. Harding caught his breath and checked on the unconscious couple. When the USD settled, Timothy Caldwell sat calmly in the corner of the room, his clothes torn and his face bloodied, but his pale blue eyes still holding that same cold intelligence that had first disturbed Dr. Harding so many months earlier. "You can't prove anything," Timothy said as the deputies secured him with ropes. "Nobody will believe that a child did all those things." Sheriff Crawford looked down at the boy with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "Maybe not," he said, "but we don't have to prove everything. Attempting to murder your family is enough to see you locked up regardless of your age." Timothy smiled at that, the same genuine expression of emotion that Dr. Harding had seen the day before. "You won't hang me," he said with absolute confidence. "I'm too young, and I'm too interesting. Someone will want to study me instead." Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Sedalia County intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. Timothy Caldwell was wrong about his fate, but right about the impossibility of proving his crime. When Sheriff Crawford attempted to present the evidence from the cave to county prosecutors, he encountered exactly the resistance that Dr. Harding had predicted. The drawings and notes were dismissed as the products of a disturbed child. acting out trauma from his parents' deaths. The pattern of accidents and deaths was attributed to coincidence compounded by Timothy's unfortunate habit of being helpful during emergencies. The attempted murder of Thomas and Sarah Caldwell, however, could not be explained away. 3 law enforcement officers had witnessed Timothy attacking his sleeping relatives with clear intent to kill. Even the most sympathetic observers could not argue that an 8-year-old boy would attack family members with a knife unless something fundamental was wrong with his character. The legal system of 1867 had no framework for dealing with violent children. Timothy was too young for adult prosecution, but too dangerous for simple placement in an orphanage or reformatory. The case created unprecedented challenges for Missouri's justice system, attracting attention from legal scholars and medical professionals throughout the region. After weeks of legal wrangling and consultation with experts from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia, a compromise was reached. Timothy would be remanded to the custody of the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton, where he would be studied and treated by the most advanced alienists available in the region. The decision satisfied no one completely. Prosecutors wanted Timothy tried as an adult for murder, while defense attorneys argued that no child so young could be held responsible for his actions. Medical professionals were divided between those who believed Timothy could be rehabilitated and those who considered him incurably dangerous. Dr. Samuel Harding volunteered to accompany Timothy to the hospital and remained there for 3 months, documenting the boy's behavior and working with hospital staff to develop understanding of what they were dealing with. The resulting case study became one of the first systematic examinations of antisocial behavior in children, though it would not be published until decades after the events. Timothy adapted to hospital life with the same calculating intelligence he had shown on the farm. He quickly learned to mimic appropriate emotions and responses, convincing several staff members that he was making remarkable progress in overcoming his traumatic episodes. Timothy would cry convincingly when discussing his crimes, express remorse that seemed genuine, and display what appeared to be authentic gratitude for the care he was receiving. But Dr. Harding observed that Timothy was merely studying the people around him, learning to manipulate them more effectively. The boy had created what amounted to a comprehensive catalogue of human emotional responses, and he could reproduce these signals with remarkable accuracy despite feeling none of the underlying emotions himself. The subject displays remarkable cognitive abilities, coupled with complete absence of genuine emotional response. Dr. Harding wrote in his detailed reports, "He has learned to simulate normal human reactions with sufficient skill to deceive casual observers, but extended observation reveals the performance to be entirely artificial. Timothy understands happiness as the face people make when they want something good, to continue, and sadness as the face people make when they want others to help them. But he has never actually experienced either emotion himself." Dr. Harding's evaluation also revealed the extent of Timothy's violent fantasies and future plans. When the boy believed he had gained Dr. Harding's trust by pretending to be fascinated by the scientific approach to studying human behavior, Timothy began sharing ideas for future experiments that made his past crimes seem almost restrained by comparison. He has developed elaborate scenarios for testing human responses to various forms of psychological and physical torture. Dr. Harding reported confidentially, "His plans demonstrate remarkable creativity and attention to detail, as well as a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. If he were allowed to mature and gain additional resources, he would likely become one of the most dangerous individuals in American history." The hospital records show that Timothy remained at the facility for 18 months. During that time, several unexplained incidents occurred that bore the hallmarks of Timothy's methods. Other patients were found dead in circumstances that suggested accident or natural causes, but which showed patterns of deliberate planning when examined carefully. 3 elderly patients died from apparent heart failure after interacting with Timothy, though all had been in relatively good health previously. 2 younger patients suffered what appeared to be accidental falls that resulted in serious injuries, but both incidents occurred in areas where Timothy had been seen earlier in the day. Most disturbing were the reports of patients who claimed Timothy had been visiting them at night, standing silently beside their beds and watching them sleep. Hospital staff who worked closely with Timothy also began experiencing unusual problems. Several nurses reported persistent nightmares after spending time with the boy, dreams that often featured detailed scenarios of violence and death. Two attendants requested transfers to other wards, claiming that they felt constantly watched, even when Timothy was supposedly confined to his room. Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, who had been brought in to provide additional expertise in treating Timothy, discovered that the boy had been keeping a secret journal. Timothy had convinced one of the nurses to provide him with paper and pencil for therapeutic writing exercises, claiming that recording his thoughts and feelings would help him process his emotions more effectively. The journal appeared to contain exactly what Timothy had claimed: daily entries describing his thoughts, his regrets about past actions, and his hopes for future rehabilitation. The writing was appropriately childlike in its language and emotional content, and it painted a picture of a deeply troubled but fundamentally redeemable young person struggling to overcome traumatic experiences. But Dr. Fitzgerald's training in European psychiatric techniques included familiarity with coded communication systems. When she applied analytical methods to Timothy's journal, she discovered that the innocent-seeming entries contained a sophisticated cipher system. The decoded messages revealed Timothy's true thoughts and plans in disturbing detail. Rather than experiencing remorse or rehabilitation, he was conducting a systematic study of the hospital, its staff, and its security procedures. His goal was not merely to escape, but to use his time in confinement to develop more advanced techniques for manipulation and murder. Day 47. Dr. F. believes my tears during today's session were authentic. Read one decoded entry. Her response pattern indicates increased sympathy and reduced suspicion. Estimate 3 more weeks of consistent performance will be required to establish sufficient trust for physical contact during session. The discovery of Timothy's coded journal led to an immediate tightening of security procedures and a reduction in his contact with hospital staff. But Timothy adapted to these changes with characteristic flexibility, shifting his focus from manipulation to information gathering about hospital routines and potential escape routes. In the summer of 1868, Timothy Caldwell disappeared from the Missouri State Hospital under circumstances that were never fully explained. The official investigation concluded that he had somehow managed to escape during a transfer between buildings despite being under constant supervision by multiple guards. Dr. Harding suspected that Timothy's escape had been far more sophisticated than the official report suggested. The boy had demonstrated remarkable patience and planning ability throughout his confinement, and it seemed likely that he had spent months preparing for his departure. Evidence discovered after Timothy's disappearance suggested that he had been manipulated the facility staff far more successfully than anyone had realized. Several guards reported having made small policy exceptions for Timothy in the week before his escape, allowing him slightly longer exercise periods, providing him with additional reading materials, making minor adjustments to his daily routine that individually seemed harmless, but collectively may have created opportunities for escape. He spent 1.5 years studying that facility and its personnel. Dr. Harding wrote in his final report on the case, by the time he made his move, he understood the psychology of every person who worked there better than they understood themselves. His escape wasn't an act of desperation. It was the culmination of a carefully executed plan. In the months and years following Timothy's disappearance, Dr. Harding began collecting reports of suspicious deaths and accidents throughout the Midwest. Many of these incidents bore hallmarks that seemed consistent with Timothy's methods: carefully staged accidents that resulted in death, evidence of systematic torture of animals, and the presence of a child who seemed unusually helpful and emotionally mature. The challenge was that Timothy would now be older, potentially strong enough to overpower adult victims, and certainly sophisticated enough to avoid the mistakes that had led to his original capture. His time of intensive study in human psychology, combined with his natural intelligence and complete lack of moral restraint, had created something unprecedented in American criminal history. Dr. Harding spent the remaining years of his career tracking these reports and attempting to develop a comprehensive understanding of what Timothy Caldwell represented. His private journals, discovered after his death in 1891 contained hundreds of pages documenting cases that might have involved Timothy, along with theoretical discussions about the nature of evil and the possibility that some individuals might be born without the capacity for moral reasoning. The broader implications of Timothy's case continued to influence discussions about criminal justice, child psychology, and mental health treatment for decades after his disappearance. His ability to deceive trained professionals raised uncomfortable questions about the reliability of psychiatric evaluation, while his manipulative skills highlighted the potential dangers of assuming that all children are inherently innocent and redeemable. The Caldwell farm was abandoned after Thomas and Sarah recovered from their ordeal. Neither could bear to remain in the place where they had unknowingly harbored a killer for nearly 2 years. The property eventually reverted to the county and was sold to developers in the 1890s, but local residents avoided the area for decades afterward. The cave where Timothy had conducted his experiments was sealed by Sheriff Crawford shortly after the boy's arrest, but the location was never forgotten by those who knew of its significance. Local legend claimed that the cave was cursed and that animals would not graze in the surrounding area. Dr. Harding's journals were donated to the Missouri Historical Society in 1923 by his daughter, who felt that the scientific value of her father's observations outweighed concerns about the disturbing nature of the content. The journals remain in the Society's archives, available to researchers who can demonstrate legitimate academic interest in the development of psychological understanding. Thomas and Sarah Caldwell never spoke publicly about their experience with Timothy, but both lived under assumed names for the remainder of their lives, apparently fearing that the boy might someday return to finish what he had started. Sarah died in 1889, and Thomas followed in 1894. Neither ever had children of their own. In his final journal entry, written just days before his death in 1891, Dr. Harding reflected on the broader implications of Timothy's case. "I have spent 24 years trying to understand what Timothy Caldwell represented, and I fear I have reached a disturbing conclusion. Timothy was not an aberration. He was a glimpse into what human beings might become when stripped of the moral and emotional constraints that we consider fundamental to our nature. If he survived to adulthood, then somewhere in America there walks a man who understands human psychology better than any trained professional, who can manipulate people with supernatural skill, and who views the rest of humanity as nothing more than subjects for experimentation."